about the maliciousness of the coronavirus and the actual threat that comes from it. Excerpt from the 737th Contact Report from the 20th of April 2020. Conversation between Billy and Ptaah. Translation by Vibka Wallder. On 23rd of May, 2020.
It is okay. No need to thank me. Well, goodbye then and see you again soon. If it is all right with you, Ptaah, I would still like to say the following. On television I have noticed that all around, and especially in Germany, with regard to the rampantly spreading corona disease, the most erroneous and craziest conspiracy theories are circulating, and therewith the populations, citizens are being frightened and misled. Such a thing has actually also happened already in earlier times when rampantly spreading diseases, epidemics and pandemics were rampant, for example, in the Middle Ages, but also from 1918 to 1920, when the Spanish flu raged. Also then, the emergence of a rampantly spreading disease, epidemic or pandemic generally posed a great danger to the population, because, as is the case today with the rampantly spreading corona disease, no one was safe from being infected. I know this, because Sfath took me back to different times when rampantly spreading diseases prevailed, indeed right back to the Bronze Age, thus to the time of more than 4,000 years ago. Also then human beings were befallen by conspiracy theories, as Sfath translated from overheard conversations at different times so that I understood what the people were saying. This was also the case at the time of the plague, whereby plague means pestis in Latin, in Greek loimós, but means nothing other than a rampantly spreading disease. Unfortunately I forget my Greek more and more. However, what I learned about all these things from the translations by Sfath during all these travels into the past was that none of the rampantly spreading diseases would have affected only certain age groups, as the virologists and their ilk nowadays claim, namely that only old and elderly human beings and human beings with underlying health problems would be infected by the coronavirus.
That does not correspond to the truth in any form, because the mutating and genetically ever-changing coronavirus does not correspond to one that specifically targets a particular age group with human beings, but one that, as I explained last year, spreads to all human beings of all ages. As I have explained several times before, also in unborn babies, toddlers, older children, adolescents and adults of all ages, including the oldest human beings. It attacks all their organs, such as the lungs, kidneys, liver and spleen, the brain, the intestines, the stomach as well as the pancreas and the heart. And under certain circumstances there is also an uninhibited attacking activity on mammals of all genera and species, as well as on various creatures and other life forms. This virus, a perfidious kind, the like of which we have never come across before in our research, corresponds to something that will last for a long time and will no longer be eradicable because it has characteristics, properties that allow it to continue to exist in a purely impulse-based form. This is also the reason that, when certain infected ones recover from the rampantly spreading disease and also create antibodies and a virus can no longer be detected, the rampantly spreading disease nevertheless persists by means of impulses alone, indeed without being medically detectable. Through it arises that because the virus continues to exist as impulse and remains active in this form, it therefore unexpectedly flares up again from the impulse dormant state and again, in a new form, brings to bear its full activity, and also the danger of infection can continue to exist. However, the whole thing does not correspond to a new outbreak, that is to say, a reactivation, but only to a sudden, further open activity that breaks out from the hidden impulse-based activity. Thus, the virus that is stored as an impulse, strongly and openly remains active, which corresponds to a characteristic that I only know with this virus, as such a manifestation has never before become known to me, and this impulse-based remaining active, as well as the ability to continue to exist actively while dormant, to then, for some inexplicable reason, suddenly become fully active again as well as infectious or otherwise disease-causing again, also corresponds to a phenomenon which we have not yet been able to research and therefore is still mysterious to us. Also to be mentioned about the whole thing is that, in normal cases as well as in special cases, the danger of an infection is always great and unpredictable, whereby an infection occurs especially via speaking because in this form the virus is transmitted from one human being to another, and this results from speaking as the expiratory droplets emitted while speaking are transmitted through the air to other human beings who therewith become infected. However, this can only be prevented by wearing suitable protective masks, because these prevent the expulsion of the breath and of the expiratory droplets into the open air and thus they cannot be carried on through the air. In this respect, however, such protective masks must be professionally and specifically made for this purpose and be made from suitable filter material. Consequently, it must be borne in mind that masks made of paper and of simple filterless materials, which are also homemade, are absolutely unusable and useless, therefore products of this kind are in no form suitable for protection. Rather they lull the wearers of such products into a false sense of security. This applies equally to cheap or rejected industrially produced masks, as well as to visors, that is to say, face shields that do not hug, fit the face and are open at the bottom and sides.
All that which you say about the coronavirus I find strange, and it makes the whole thing even more malicious than the existence of the virus already is. In the past, rampantly spreading diseases were considered messengers of evil, while especially the big rampantly spreading diseases cost many human lives each time, also crippled the human beings and disfigured them. However, all this is disregarded these days because the majority of the earthlings, to which also the overwhelming majority of the governors and so forth belongs, simply stupidly takes every day as it comes and does not think of the rampantly spreading disease events of the past, but half-wittedly only thinks of festivities and commemoration ceremonies for war-related events and so forth. Hence today also no tangible laws on rampantly spreading diseases exist and no decisive guidelines for necessary safety and behavioral measures, in accord with which a threateningly emerging rampantly spreading disease could be contained early and stopped completely before it becomes an epidemic or even a pandemic. However, since no new and therefore no intellect and no rationality prevail with the absolute majority of the governors, it is hopeless in this respect. And since the majority of the peoples muddle through in the same frame and there is no intellect and no rationality present, every catastrophe can escalate uninhibitedly and spread death, distress and misery. When, for example, a wave of a plague or other rampantly spreading disease rolled up in the past, then most notably always the God delusion believers, as a result of their religious insanity, cried out to their non-existent gods and hoped in vain for help, which is why they did not even try to flee any more and did not try to separate themselves. Otherwise, in their God-belief delusion, they tried to explain the rampantly spreading disease by means of conspiracy theories, indeed mostly as a punishment by their angry God for their disobedience and so forth. Of course, they did not know the cause of the respective rampantly spreading disease and sought refuge in their deluded belief and finally submissively accepted the punishment of their angry God or gods. Consequently, often in completely resigned submissiveness, this punishment by God or the gods had to serve as an explanation. Furthermore, In earlier times and especially in the Middle Ages in Catholic Christianity, it was the case that the Christian religious bigwigs of all kinds, beginning with the simple priest possessed by a god delusion right up to the highest belief-deluded bigwig in Rome. The Pope recommended the God belief delusion as well as masses and processions as a remedy to combat diseases, rampantly spreading diseases and epidemics. Daily attendance at Mass and participation in sectarian salvation beggary processions, which were often held, were supposed to appease the angry imaginary God, which naturally turned out to be absolute nonsense and counterproductive insanity, because the exact opposite resulted from the whole thing. This was indeed the case because instead of containing the rampantly spreading disease, it spread more and more, because, due to the assembly of the deluded believers, the infections by viruses, bacteria and microorganisms spread at a frantic pace from one human being to the next and increased. Consequently, the rampantly spreading disease could spread uncontrollably, and unstoppably more and more human beings were infected. Thus, also in this respect as in countless other instances and cases since the year and since time immemorial due to the religious, sectarian God delusion belief, hundreds of millions of human beings have died up to this day as a result of rampantly spreading diseases, wars, hatred and God delusion massacres, or even entire peoples have been exterminated. But all those earthlings who are of low intelligence and are simple-minded, who are God delusion believing, will nevertheless not become more prudent, rather all of them will submissively allow themselves to be further pested and made stupid, financially exploited and incited against one another by the upper and uppermost God delusion belief sectarians and their irrational delusion belief servants, in order to by means of murder, manslaughter and war and so forth put their own God delusion belief victoriously to the forefront and to kill off every other God delusion belief. At that time, in the olden days, the human beings had no knowledge of germs and pathogens, of medications and vaccines. Consequently also not as many human lives could be saved as is possible with today's medicine, even though it still leaves very much to be desired. It is true that in terms of good medicine very much has been painstakingly achieved in the course of medical history, albeit often only through many deadly experiments and dangerous mistakes. However, unfortunately all of the medical remedies and medical therapies and so forth that have been produced so far do not correspond to what humanity on Earth really needs in order to combat malignant diseases and rampantly spreading diseases before they break out. Additionally, the authorities and governments and organizations responsible for the health of humankind worldwide are absolutely incapable of doing everything responsibly possible to prevent epidemics and pandemics before they begin to spread. For the majority of these sad figures only big-mouthness has always been, and still is today, their métier. Even today a huge lack of intellect and rationality prevail with this clique, gang, which is why also these days they are responsible for the deaths of many human beings as a result of the rampantly spreading corona disease, as also applies to that part of the population which, in its low intelligence and simple-mindedness and lack of intelligence, gives the rampantly spreading corona disease a hand spreading, and plays with death. Now, it is true that nowadays many diseases and rampantly spreading diseases, which have in the past led to the worst epidemics and pandemics and cost hundreds of millions of human lives as history proves, are largely curable or eradicated. Today in Europe it is the case that, since the beginning of the 18th century, it is indeed no longer whole groups that have been infected with the plague, rather only individuals, which, however, is different in poorer regions of the world because it still exists there. The Spanish flu also claimed many millions of human lives between 1918 and 1920, just as the rampantly spreading corona disease will cost hundreds of thousands of human lives in the present time. Poverty quite especially plays a large role in this, as does however predominantly and in particular the stupidity of the peoples and their governors, who are the closest allies of such rampantly spreading diseases and other infectious diseases, because their rationality and intellect are still so underdeveloped that they can neither understand the whole of such rampantly spreading disease events nor fathom and implement the necessary measures against them. And it is also a fact that, since the last century, as a result of globalization, many new diseases and rampantly spreading diseases have appeared all over the world, which have not been controlled and eradicated by terrestrial medicine until this day, and which cannot be eradicated, such as Ebola, West Nile virus, HIV and others. And what has happened in this regard in the last 100 years will also happen in the future as a result of the excessive humanity on Earth, that is to say, the overpopulation, because new dangerous germs and pathogens will appear and will bring with them an ever-increasing potential for new rampantly spreading diseases.
This will indeed be the case, because it is an inevitable consequence of overpopulation.
That is so, I know, because I have seen that together with Sfath,